Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. It was a Saturday afternoon and we had company. Jenny and her husband Trev have been our friends since we moved to Houston. We went to dinner with them, to parties in the neighborhood, as well as to each other's houses after a movie or a walk. They were the same age as us, in their late 20s. We are all college graduates dealing with college debt, careers, and occasional separations due to business trips by Trev and my wife Debbie. Deb was preparing for one of them, and Trev had just left our house for the airport to go to the West Coast, which was his territory. It was our way of life. They were traveling, and we were keeping the house on fire. Jenny and I worked as an accountant and an architect, respectively. Our travels were minimal, if not infrequent. In most cases, only one of the two couples had a traveling spouse. When this happened, the other spouse would visit the couple in town for dinner or a weekend picnic. After Trev said goodbye and took a taxi to the airport, I let the girls chat in the kitchen and went to the garage. I cleaned my workbench and then checked the security system, which we spent good money on after the recent robberies in our unit. We had microphones and cameras in every room that powered the server in the attic. Connecting to our cloud account saved everything that was captured when each device was activated by motion sensors. I could check any room using a phone app or any computer I could log into. Out of habit, I checked to see if it was working. "How was your last trip?" Jenny asked my wife Debbie as they sat at the kitchen table. "As usual," Debbie giggled. "Work, dinner, bar, and then, at last, get some sleep." "Is it true what they say about people who wander away from their family on business trips?" Jenny was obviously worried about her husband. My wife paused before answering. A significant second pause. "I wouldn't worry too much, Jen," my wife replied, taking a sip of her drink. "Trev always comes back to your house, doesn't he?" "Yes, but I wonder what he does when he's alone, if he's alone." "Jen," her wife reassured her, "he comes home to you. Don't pay attention to what happens when he's not there." "What do you mean, Deb?" "Exactly what I said," my wife replied. "What happens outside the house doesn't mean anything." I was shocked when my wife's words bounced and replayed in my head. What happens outside the house doesn't mean anything. "What's going on? When people are not at home, it doesn't mean anything?" What happens when people are away from home doesn't mean anything. Did she really say that? I asked myself. "Debbie, what are you saying?" Jenny asked anxiously. But by this point, Debbie had become more quiet and reserved. "Nothing, Jen," she replied cautiously. "Just that you're worrying for nothing. Trev loves you to death. He comes home to you and loves you. His trips are just business, nothing else." I could see that Jenny was not reassured by Debbie's remark, but she politely allowed my wife to change the subject. I let them chat for a while before I went back to the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee. After what I heard, I wanted my mind to be clear. After another 40 minutes of small talk, Jenny drove home and we settled in for the night. I was polite to my wife, but careful. To say that her words made me nervous would be an understatement. As she went upstairs to take a shower, various thoughts came into my head. Did she cheat when she was away? Had she done this many times, just once, recently, weeks or months ago? But the way she said it said a lot. Her comment was not a thoughtful introspection. In fact, there was no fright or disapproval in her tone, just a statement of fact, accepting this is what it is without any disapproval. What should I do? What does any man do? Can I just say a few words to her? Am I really going to throw away 4 years of marriage? We were thinking about having children. Did she make love when she was traveling? How could I be sure that the child would be mine? Then I thought about it. She usually traveled to Phoenix, San Diego, Seattle, and Omaha. Did she have lovers at every point? Or does she have only one lover? Was he prettier, thicker, longer? None of these thoughts made me horny. Instead, I felt only disappointment, anxiety, and sadness. The woman I loved cheated on me. As much as I wanted to be wrong, the logical part of my mind argued otherwise. My wife Debbie, having mentioned it, exposed her infidelity. I didn't sleep with her that night. She came down to get me, but I acted like I was sleeping on the couch with my face buried in the pillows. She tried to wake me up, but I was deep asleep, and eventually she gave up. Without bothering to turn to face her, I remained in this position until I fell into a restless sleep until the morning. The first thing I felt when I started to wake up was the smell of coffee and the sound of sandaled footsteps in the kitchen. I opened one eye and saw a cup of coffee on the table. Overcome with anxiety, I said nothing and did not move, but I realized that I was only delaying the inevitable. When I opened my eyes, Debbie was standing by the couch in just sandals and a bathrobe. Her blonde hair fell over her right shoulder as she looked at me thoughtfully. I looked and stood up, ignoring the coffee. She gave me a worried look as I walked past in silence. After locking the bathroom door, I started brushing my teeth. Creaking sounds from outside the door told me she was standing outside, but then they died down. We haven't said a word to each other all morning. I was glad because I wasn't ready to talk to her. I wasn't afraid to meet her face to face. If anything, I was looking forward to it, but first I had to know for sure. I needed information. That's my nature. I've never taken a single step without knowing the score. I took my laptop and settled into an office in the corner of our living room. It was a desk that looked towards the living room from the corner, and I could work without her seeing the screen. Debbie walked past me a few times from the bedroom to the kitchen, but she stayed away from me. The silence made me angry. Why didn't she ask me what happened? Was this part of her game? Having calmed down, I focused on finding private detectives in the cities where she went. After filling out the forms and writing a description of what I needed to do, I used my personal credit card to hire 4 detective agencies to investigate. "Are you hungry?" she finally asked around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I didn't want to eat with her. "No," I said and pretended to be busy. She was looking at me from the kitchen, trying to figure out what was wrong with me, but I didn't want to look back. Any wife who had nothing to hide would have wondered why her husband turned away from her. Any wife who has nothing to worry about. "Maybe we'll go somewhere," I suddenly said and stood up, reaching for my wallet, mobile phone, and car keys. She looked surprised for a few seconds, then nodded and reached for her purse. She already had the phone in her hand. She kept the same phone all the time. Debbie never let her phone out of her sight, and it was password protected. As we headed for the door, I let her go ahead and stared at the beautiful and young figure, a figure that, until last night, I considered my own, like my body. We always took my car when we went out together, so she moved to the passenger seat, waiting for me to open the door, as I always did. Considering recent events, this was the last thing I wanted to do. But I forced myself. Whatever happened before she left on Tuesday, I had to make sure she didn't suspect anything. I thought I might have already messed it up. "I'm sorry about today," I said. "I think I made a mistake while working on the project, and I have to make some quick conversations and corrections when I come on Monday." "Oh," she exclaimed with relief. Then she caught herself and looked worried. "Johnson's project?" She asked about the house I finished 3 weeks ago. So much for her attention during our conversations. "No," I said. "Something related to a future project. This week I will make new drawings and correct my mistake. Everything should be fine. I just hate making mistakes." "You're being too hard on yourself," she replied more calmly when I gave her the expected explanation. "Everyone makes mistakes." I almost said, "That's for sure," but he restrained himself. We chatted about all sorts of trifles, and then about the bills. In my mind, I was thinking about how to deal with where to go to sleep. There was no way I could get away with falling asleep on the couch again. When we got home, I took a shower and went to bed with my tablet to read. But it seems to me that I was looking at the same page for 30 minutes while Debbie was taking a shower and coming out of the bathroom. She put on her robe again. She was lying next to me in a bathrobe, but I continued to read or pretend to read. She put her hand on my hip and moved closer. "Are you mad at me?" she finally said. I didn't answer but turned to study her face. I wanted to see if she would give me a sign. "I found your pills in the bathroom. You're taking them again." She froze at my statement. "Yes, I know," she replied. "I'm really sorry. I thought we'd wait a few months." I nodded, not wanting to make a fuss. "No problem," I replied. "You're crazy." But it was not a concern, but rather a statement or irritation. "No," I said. "I don't want a baby right now either." I didn't say it, but I thought, "with you." She was silent for a few seconds. Then she took her hand away when I was lying still. After a few minutes, she turned away from me and turned off the light on her side. I could hear her breathing, and eventually I began to cry softly. It was all I could take. I got up, took my tablet with me, and left the room. "Carson." I heard her words, but I closed the door and went back to the couch. The next morning, when I got up, she was already awake and dressed. It was 6 in the morning, and it was time for my morning run. She was already dressed for work. "I made you coffee," she said and started to say something, but stopped. She probably already realized that I was mad at her. When did you find out about the pills? What is it? She asked. I wanted to say that it was only yesterday, but I didn't want her to think that it was recently. Last week, I lied, no longer caring that I was lying to her. And you didn't say? You didn't bother to ask me what I thought about it, I replied. That's all. Me? No problem, Deb, I replied. If you don't want a baby, with me that means I don't want to either. She wanted to say something, but I passed her by. I'm late. I had to run. I needed some privacy to clear my head. Running has always helped me focus and pull myself together. It started in junior high when I was in high school, and then in high school, the army, and then college. Running has always cured my distraction and self-doubt when I was a young man, and then a man. Now a married man is considering a divorce. In the evening, she came home and cooked dinner. Out of politeness, I sat down next to her and ate. I barely finished my plate, but I tried to be polite. Can we talk about the baby when I get home from my trip? What is it? She asked. If you want, I replied. But all I could think about was what she said to Jenny. What happens outside the house doesn't mean anything. The next morning, she was waiting for me to wake up. She was dressed for the trip. Her travel bag was by the door, along with her coat. Will you be okay while I'm gone? What is it? She asked. I'll survive, I replied. I always do that. Carson, she said. I love you. I nodded politely. She saw the pain on my face, and I saw her wince. I think I heard a sob as she ran out the door, leaving me staring at her as I heard the car start and drive away. Training? That day I went to the lawyer about the divorce. Since we had no children, we could only divide all the property accumulated from the first day of our marriage. But adultery was taken into account in the division of property. We didn't have a prenup, which, as I now realized, was stupid. But if the investigators find something useful, then eventually I can get most of it. But the lawyers will fight over it in court and drag out the case to get more royalties. What a mess. Jenny had been texting and texting me, but I wasn't ready to talk yet. Maybe I'll drop by her place later. But she beat me to it and showed up at my job. She was waiting by my car. Why aren't you answering my calls and texts? What is it? She asked. I had something on my mind, I replied. Take me to dinner and then home, she said. We need to talk. What happens when people are not at home does not mean anything. When I reminded her of my wife's remark, Jenny nodded and looked straight at me. Where is she today? What is it? She asked. San Diego, I said. At least that's what she said. Did you call her at work? What is it? She asked. No, I said, feeling stupid. Maybe it was worth it, she replied. Because I did it. I stared at her for a while. Permission. The following Friday, Debbie returned from a trip. First, she went to work, and then she went home. By that time, I had already cooked dinner and set the table. Oh my God, honey, she exclaimed. You gave it your all. She ran up to kiss me. It wasn't a tongue kiss, but it was the type of kiss that a husband and wife usually give each other, even in public. I let her kiss me, and it was a quick kiss. There was no awkward moment to worry about. At that moment, I thought that this kiss and her warm hand touching my arm would be the last for us. Trev and Jen are coming here for dinner, I said, checking the stuffed peppers in the oven. Trev, and Jen? What is it? She asked in surprise. Will they come? Tonight? I understood her predicament. I thought we were with you. She paused when she saw me turn and give her a polite, disarming smile. I think I'll change and get ready. I watched her go into the bedroom to take off her business suit. That morning, she went to her last meeting in Omaha, then flew home and walked past her office before returning. It is clear that she planned to take a shower, have dinner, and relax a little. After all, she's had a pretty long and stressful week, hasn't she? I checked my phone for messages one last time, from Jan. On the way. The email was sent 5 minutes ago. At that moment, the shower was turned off upstairs. If everything goes right, Deb will get dressed soon, just in time for our guests. They're on their way, I shouted to her, but there was no answer. I could imagine why. Seeing them was the last thing she wanted. She came downstairs in jeans and a white t-shirt. The straps of her pink bra were visible underneath. She wore flip-flops, as we both did when we were relaxing at home. Smiling nervously at me, she came closer and put her hand on my shoulder. How can I help you? What is it? She asked. I have wine cooling in the fridge, I replied, checking the stuffed peppers again. It will be ready in 15 minutes maximum. It smells good, she said. What's that on the pot? Pasta orzo, I replied. She had a sad look on her face when she nodded at my choice for dinner. It was a dish that I cooked for her on our last anniversary, after we discovered Greek cuisine during a trip to Europe. The memories of those days of our honeymoon saddened me. But this evening was going to happen, and that was part of it. The table was set for 4, 2 on each side. She glanced at him briefly, then took a bottle of Zinfandel from the refrigerator, opened it, and inhaled. May I ask? She managed to say before the doorbell rang. I'll open it now, I said, and left her in the kitchen. I whispered to myself, showtime. I opened the door to our friend standing nearby. He looked a little worried, nervous, but she gave me a knowing smile and then bent down to kiss me right on the lips in front of him. Hello, stud, she said, pulling away and walking past me. I could tell that Trev wasn't surprised by our public display of affection. Hi, Trev, I said with a smile. No, I wasn't grinning. Come in. Carson, he replied, stepping inside. Jen and Debbie were already chatting in the kitchen when we entered. For the first time in a long time, I noticed Trevor as he looked around the room. His gaze darted from Jenny to Deb and back to me. He looked like a man trying to figure out what was going on. We're having a European dinner sitting down, I announced. Jen is sitting with me and Deb is sitting with Trev. Trevor and my wife exchanged a quick glance and turned away when Jen giggled. I think I like it. A European-themed evening from eating to sitting. And what else do Europeans do? What is it? She asked, raising an eyebrow. But Trev and Debbie didn't say anything, sitting next to each other. I could tell they were on edge because Jen just kept talking to them, being herself. Inside, I wanted to laugh. Europeans share a lot more than just seats at the table, I replied with a grin at Jen, who grinned back and then laughed. They trade spouses or enter into open marriages. Interesting, Jen said. What would you think of that, Trev? He tensed up. I wouldn't like that, he replied. My wife flinched for a second and then looked away. I don't know, Trev, Jen replied. Perhaps the Europeans have something in this. And again, my wife and Trev just looked at us and exchanged furtive glances. After serving the food, I offered everyone a glass of wine, and did not give the 2 who were sitting opposite us the opportunity to refuse. I just filled their glasses. They'll need them soon. While we were eating, Jen appreciated the choice of the dish and how well it was cooked. Deb and Trevor politely agreed. It could be said that they were courteous, but both were alarmed. How was your trip, Trev? I asked while we were eating. Both he and my wife stopped eating at the same time. It would be funny if it wasn't sad to see. With each passing minute, the pain of awareness was causing more pain. Only Jen's hand on my hip calmed me down. It wasn't a touch, but soothing and caring. It's the same, he said. Get to know the customers and our representatives in the region, and then go to the next city and do it again. You, Deb? Jenny asked. The same as Trev, she replied. We both do pretty much the same job, but for different companies and clients. By this time, they were both picking at their food. Again, that would be funny, if not sad. I tried to ignore it and refilled their glasses. When we were done, that is, we stopped eating because both my wife and Trev had lost their appetites. Jen and I took the plates. Debbie offered to help, but I stopped her. You and Trev have just returned from a trip. Go sit in the living room and we'll be there in a few minutes. Okay, she said with a scared look and a forced smile. Despite the tension, Trev wanted to say something to his wife, but she went into the bathroom. I watched them walk into the living room, casting questioning glances at each other. Maybe they were whispering, but I couldn't make out what they were talking about. But I could imagine. They were worried. When Jen returned, she and I joined them. So you guys are not interested in an open European marriage? I said with a grin. Jen joined me, laughing. Debbie and Trev just giggled nervously as if it was a joke. Too bad, Jenny added, teasing me. They are such hypocrites. How about we look at something I've come across this week? I think you'll like it. Is this a movie about chicks? Jen asked with feigned enthusiasm. It has both male and female aspects, I replied, turning the TV on the wall and going to the file I saved on my hard drive. The first scene showed street scenes from a city with lots of sunlight and the coast. He then turned around to show the naval base as the car drove north and stopped behind a taxi parked in front of the hotel. Trev hesitated a bit. But Debbie recognized the hotel just before the video showed Trev first, and then her getting out of the taxi and entering the hotel hand in hand. By this time, shock was reflected on their faces. The camera followed them as they checked in and then walked to the elevator with their luggage and each other. They held hands again, and when the elevator door closed, they bent down to kiss. "Carson, you can stop," Trevor said, but Jen coldly stopped him. "Shut up and watch," she said in a cold voice. "Both of you." When I turned to look at my wife, panic and shame were reflected on her face. I saw her lips tremble as she tried to look away from the screen. After that, the scene changed inside the hotel room. And yes, our stars gave a show. The bastard wasn't small, but he wasn't that big either. When I turned to look at my crying wife, I couldn't help myself. "Fuck you, Carson." Trev finally spoke, but he didn't say anything when Jen slapped him and stared at him. The scene now consisted of Trev between my wife's legs. Then I turned up the volume. "That was good," Trev said there. "Does he give it to you so well?" "Sometimes," my wife replied when her mood changed. "I told you not to mention Carson when we do this." "And why not? A guilty conscience?" he said, returning to the room. "I just don't want to talk about him." "You're killing the mood, Trev," she replied. After that, they lay down on the bed, and the video lasted for almost an hour. They both took a nap. Deb woke up first and lay with her face turned away from Trevor. Then he woke up and reached for her. She didn't resist and let him turn her over on her stomach as he put a pillow under her hips. She handed him a tube of lubricant, which he took. Jen, who had seen this video before, looked at her husband with cold, hard eyes. He was angry but resigned to seeing evidence of his betrayal towards his wife. For her part, my wife stopped looking and quietly sobbed in her arms. The next scene was about Trevor getting in and out of my wife's ass several times as she gasped and clutched the sheets underneath her. When her face turned to the camera, an expression of wild despair appeared on it as she moaned from his thrusts. "Take it," Trevor said when he finally grunted and squeezed coming in her ass. Debbie's pupils seemed to dilate as she took one last breath and closed her eyes. Soon after, they fell asleep. The video stopped for a second and flashed back to the next morning when they made love again and then took a shower before breaking up. They were both in San Diego. At that moment, the screen went blank and I stopped it. Trevor glared at me angrily as Jen got up and came over to sit next to me. "Well," she said, "that was enough. Instructive, isn't it?" Debbie finally looked at me. "How did you find out?" That's all she asked for. I turned on the screen again as I expected. He and Jen were talking in our kitchen last week. Jen: "Is it true what they say about people who make love on business trips?" Deb: "I wouldn't worry too much, Jen. Trev always comes to your house, doesn't he?" Jen: "Yes, but I wonder what he does when he's alone. If he's alone." Deb: "Jen, he's coming home to you. Don't pay attention to what happens when he's not there." Jen: "What do you mean, Deb?" Deb: "That's exactly what I said. What happens when people are not at home doesn't mean anything. What happens outside the house doesn't mean anything. What happens outside the house doesn't mean anything. What happens outside the house doesn't mean anything." To heighten the effect, I played the last phrase for them 3 times. "That's what happened, Deb," I said. "That's what gave you away. It made me think you were cheating on me. I didn't know who I was with, but then I realized it was you." "I already had my suspicions," Jen interjected. "The way you two always manage to cross paths on trips. How you sometimes avoid each other in conversation." She stopped and turned to me. "It's funny that they felt guilty tonight and constantly checked on each other. You were both pathetic." "I've hired investigators in all 4 cities you've traveled to," I said. She grimaced and shook her head. She sobbed again, knowing that more was coming. The next video showed Deb with another man in a bar, and then walking to a hotel room, grabbing her ass on the way. "Oh, you fool," Trevor shouted at her. "Did you cheat on me?" Jen and I burst out laughing at his outburst and the despair on my wife's face. They stared at each other and then back at us. "But wait," I said sarcastically. "That's not all." In the continuation of the video, Trevor was in a room in Las Vegas with a slender and muscular black woman. "My husband never does that to me," the black woman said. "I was glad to help," Trevor replied. Unable to help myself, I clapped my hands. Debbie just shook her head in disgust. "How lovely," Jen had said. Scammers deceive each other, priceless footage. After that, we all went quiet. Everyone is in their own thoughts. Deb spoke first. "Carson," she said, looking at me with trembling lips and voice. "So what's left for us?" That's when I turned around and looked at her seriously. "You know," I told them both. "Jen and I had a few days to come to an agreement and talk. We're both cooperative people. In fact, neither of us are hypocrites. If either of you or both of you had raised the issue of our exchange, we would have agreed. To be honest, I thought I'd ask you, Deb, but you chose a different path, didn't you? You could ask me openly and honestly so that we can make this decision and go down this path together. Instead, you chose a selfish way to do what you like and keep me in the dark. You chose to lie and betray me. Us. You betrayed us, Debbie. How can I forgive this? How can I get past you, who have decided to act behind my back and think that you have the right to do whatever you want when you travel? Well, not only on trips. After how long did you start doing it here? I bet they've already done that, Jen said. I was told at his work that your dear wife took him to lunch several times. Debbie turned away, and so did Trevor. So what do you want? Trevor finally asked. Well, Jen said, it looks like we have everything we need for the two of you. None of us have children, so all we have to worry about is dividing up our assets. And since adultery can be used in court in Texas, you're both fucked. Literally. Give me your phones, both of you, I said. Open them. Deb flinched but held it out unlocked. Trevor balked, but Jen came over and just grabbed his cell phone. It's not locked, she replied, handing it to me. Give me a minute. I'll check his cloud account. It took her a few minutes, during which I checked Deb's phone. She didn't write anything down either, but I glanced into her gallery to find photos with Trev and another man. Cool, Deb, I told her, shaking my head when she looked away. So that's how it's going to happen. I'll never be able to trust you again. Too many lies in too long a time. While I was talking, Jen called. Come on, she said, and turned to look at what was happening. You both work in companies where there are moral standards. Have you really forgotten about it? I could almost see the panic on their faces. Both your bosses and their legal departments would be very disappointed with your antics. One of them hunts for skirts himself, but his company had to pay for one of his indiscretions, so now he allows his HR departments and legal services to pursue those who break the rules. That must be your boss, Trevor. Damn, he muttered. That's why you're in trouble, asshole, Jen told him. I've given you everything you've ever asked for in bed. You stabbed me in the back, Trevor. It's over between us. Well, not yet. What do you mean? Well, I said, picking up the story, divorces are a given, and you will both sign papers giving us 70% of the assets each. If you fight with us, the video of your performances will go to your families and friends, as well as your employers. Debbie looked at me pleadingly. Please don't. Can we try to figure it out? Really, Deb? I chuckled. If you saw a video of me using Jen behind your back, would you try to figure it out? Please give me a chance. I did it, Deb, I snapped. You and I were in trouble before you went on your fucking tour, and you decided to do it anyway. You decided to start taking pills without talking to me. We're married. We decided to live together and make decisions together. You betrayed me and my trust before you even slept with him and anyone else. You lost respect for me, so it was easy for you. I just want to know one thing, why? She looked away, then back at me. I've never had any experience with other men before you. One guy came in less than a minute, Carson. That was my experience before you. I wanted to try others and find out what it's like. I stared at her in disbelief. You should have thought of that before you married me, I replied. This is when people try others, not after they get married. Marriage is not just an obligation. It is a contract between two people. It means that the two of them are against the whole world. And that marriage is exceptional until both parties agree to it. Well, you know, about leaving everyone else behind? She wanted to say something but stopped and then spoke. Carson, I wanted to go out and have some fun before the wedding, but you showed up and I didn't want to risk losing you. Everything was so good between us for the first few years, but this last year it all came back to me. I began to wonder what other men would be like. Not love. I had you for that. I shook my head in disappointment. All you had to do was ask me, Deb. All you had to do was talk to me. Here at home, we could find people we know and trust. Damn it. I'd let you make love to that asshole if we all decided to do it together since we were all friends. Instead, you two went behind our backs and violated our trust. Debbie, with trust and love comes respect. You've lost all respect for me to act behind my back. We could figure this out together. But you decided to do it without me. Jen nodded along with me in agreement. That goes for you too, Trev, she said, especially after we talked. It was my turn to look at her in surprise when Trevor turned away and Debbie looked at Jen and Trevor in shock. Did you do that? What is it? She asked. What did he say? That bastard told me he would never share me with Carson and would leave me if I talked about it again or he caught me. Can you believe that? Debbie shook her head, looking at Trevor, and then pushed off and hit him. You stupid bastard, she said as he tried to shield himself from the second and third blows. When we started, I said we should bring them in, didn't I? But you said no, that they'll never get over it and leave us. I've been listening to you, and now where are we? You've turned into a cheater, Deb. It didn't take long, he said angrily, so don't act like a saint to me. I remember our first kiss at Christmas last year. You let me kiss you for a minute or two when Jen was in the bathroom and Carson went out to the car. It didn't take me long to get you into bed. Actually, less than a week. I remembered that night. Everything seemed so perfect. A holiday with our best friends. And while his wife and I were out of sight, he and my wife were kissing. I fucking hate you, she told him back. It's damn mutual, cheater, he replied. Jen and I watched them blaze at each other for a few minutes. We looked at them with contempt and disbelief. Was there any hope after that? It looked hopeless. There are too many lies and too much betrayal on the way. If we had children or were older, I might have been weak and thought about it. But I was young, and there were no children who could bind us to each other. I wanted to leave. The doorbell rang again. This time, Jen opened it. She returned with a woman who was carrying 2 bags and a smartphone. Deborah Madison Kane? She asked my wife, who nodded. You have been served. She gave her the envelope and took a picture of her. Trevor Gunderson? What is it? She asked Trev, who nodded reluctantly. You have been served. Debbie was now openly sobbing with the papers in her hands. Jen turned to me and shrugged her shoulders. Then she went up to her husband. It's over between us. Go home, pack your stuff and get out. I never want to see you again. Do you understand? If you tell me anything, the video will go to your parents, your job, and anyone else you can call a friend. Understood? Deb didn't move, but then she turned to me and did something I didn't expect. She got down on her knees and crawled over to Jen and me. I'm begging you both. Please forgive me and give me another chance. I know I screwed up. It's all my fault. Do whatever you want with me. Just don't throw me out on the street, Carson. Please, Jen, please talk to him. I'm begging you both. Debbie looked into my eyes pleadingly. I immediately realized that this was my test as a man. Yes, I loved her. No matter how devoted I felt, I still loved her. But still, what she did was unforgivable. But I felt like throwing her out just like that would be wrong. But I will never trust her again. Jen is moving in here and into my bedroom, I said, looking into her eyes. I saw her wince. I understand, she said, stifling a sob. I deserve it. I need to talk to her about you. Is that clear? The door closed, Trevor left, and Jen returned. What are you going to do with her? What is it? She asked. You know you can't trust her, right? I know, I replied. I'm not going to. Debbie looked at each of us in despair. Please, was all she said. Shut up, Jen replied and pushed her back to the floor. Debbie lay there for a second or two and then got back on her knees. Carson, please, don't divorce me. Debbie, this ship has sailed, I said, looking down at her. We're getting divorced, but there will be a legal separation for 3 months. You have just enough time to convince me that you're worth saving. I'll be living with Jen the whole time. She'll be in my bedroom, what used to be yours. Is that clear? What do you want me to do, Carson? What is it? She asked meekly. Well, first of all, you have to beg Jen to give you a chance. If she doesn't, you're finished. Debbie nodded and turned to get up. I've been enjoying it so much the last 2 nights and was planning to do it again. Jen, I'm so sorry, she said. Bullshit, Debbie, Jen replied. You're just sorry you got caught. I know it looks like that, Jen, but there are no buts, Jen snapped. You have betrayed my trust as well as your husband's. You two deserve each other. If it were up to me, I'd throw you out, but this is not my home, and soon it won't be your home anymore. I would recommend finding a cheap motel for the night, for the weekend, and then look for an apartment to move into. You need some time to think about what you've done. Debbie turned to me as if I could save her, but I just stared at her, not backing down an inch. Get your stuff and go, Debbie, I told her. Pack your things for at least a week and we'll talk about how you'll get the rest when you need it. When she nodded and sobbed again, her face showed dejection and sad agreement. She got up slowly and went into the bedroom to get her things. 40 minutes later, she packed 2 suitcases, a travel bag, a laptop bag, and a handbag. Jen and I watched her load everything into her car, standing side by side when she stopped for the last time. She reached out to me, but I pulled away. She sobbed again and left in tears. "It went better than we thought," Jen said, leaning toward me. "They brought this on themselves," I added as we watched my future ex-wife's car drive off into the distance. "Every spouse has the opportunity to cheat. Not everyone shares it." "That's funny," she said, coming back with me. "What's so funny?" I asked Jen while she was undressing. "Some people think they have an open marriage, but they forget to tell their spouse about it." "Do you want an open relationship?" "What is it?" she asked when I pulled away. "It's too much like dating other people," I replied. "Do you need this?" "I just need to make love in a different way from time to time, Carson. It's been a while since I've tried any variety." "Then I might need another girl sometimes," I replied. "It's a deal," she said breathlessly. "Now use me." The divorce took place 3 months later. Both Jen and I got the 70% we asked for. Jen sold her house, and I took out a loan to pay Debbie 30% of the house that belonged to her. In one day, all financial and legal issues were resolved in court, but not Debbie's pain and guilt. She lost everything except her job. Her parents eventually found out about it when she began to prepare them in case I sent them videos and photos out of spite. I've never done this before. Trevor just disappeared after his divorce from Jen was final. She had enough money to buy him back, but the last thing he told her was that he would be in touch. It's been 2 years and we haven't heard from him. Debbie is still working and traveling. I don't care what she does anymore. The other day, Jen and I were at a cafe and she walked by, busy with her phone. Jen and I live together, but we're both afraid of serious commitments. It's been a year since my divorce, and my memories of my time with Debbie are fading. Jen and I are talking about a trip around the world, or at least they did. This damn virus from Wuhan in China has ruined our plans to see faraway places, so we're both on vacation and doing nothing but running, walking, and making love like rabbits. But I'm still afraid, just like her. Who wouldn't be afraid after what we've been through? I received a letter from Debbie the other day. "Hi, Carson. I hope you're well. I'm trying to live my new life, but honestly, it's not easy. I miss our time together. I miss you and us. I've had so much time to think about what I've done to you, to me, and to us. I messed it up thinking I deserved to have everything I wanted, no matter what it was. In my quest for experimentation, self-indulgence, and self-fulfillment, I hurt the man I loved and lost my marriage. Not to mention that she helped break up Jenny and Trevor's marriage. It would be so easy to blame him for what happened, but we all know that's not true. Everything I did voluntarily. No one forced me. I owe you an apology, Carson, not only for ruining our marriage and our life together, but also for, as you said, losing respect for you. But before I did, I lost respect for myself. I succumbed to the belief that I deserved the pleasure and experienced that I missed everything. So I have an experience behind me that I never expected. Divorce? Nothing about it. Nothing attracts or satisfies at all. He tore me apart. I heard that you and Jen are still together. I wish you both happiness. But to say that I'm not jealous would be a lie. Take care of yourself and Jen. Unfortunately, your ex-wife, with love, Debbie. P.S. 2 things. Loneliness sucks. What happens outside the house means a lot.